Hi, this is Zach, and today I'm going to be showing off an interesting little program called the Large Scale Evolution Simulator. I'm just going to jump straight into it here, and I'm going to explain things as I go along. Basically, we're going to be creating these little creatures here. I'm going to zoom in and show you. These are going to be what we will be evolving today. I will once again be going into describing these creatures. However, I'm going to wait for them to evolve slightly more, because right now they're really dumb and they honestly don't know what they're doing. I'm going to take this time to explain a bit about the map here itself and these bars in the top left. So the bars in the top left, they represent the distribution of species. Unfortunately, you can't, say, click on these little bars and see exactly which creatures or which bars these correspond to. However, it does give you a decent understanding of the biodiversity of your creatures. I'm going to bump the creature count up to 85. Just to speed things up a bit here. Give a few more opportunities for life to start. Okay, going into the map. In the top left over here, we have a light red area. These tiles have a base energy rating of 59. As the creatures go over it, they start from eating. The number at the top, the climate, and the T, they are fairly irrelevant. We're not going to be messing with that too much. The T basically represents if it's terrestrial land. You can see over here, all the black spaces are actually water. As strange as that sounds, so if you imagine this is blue water, and as you can see, this water has an energy rating of 0. Furthermore, in the water, the creatures do expend a lot more energy than they do walking on the land. Of course, depending on which traits they evolve from. These white areas, these grey and white areas, they are terrestrial land. However, they have a 0 energy rating on them. So the creatures are fairly happy to travel over this. However, they will be becoming weaker, so they are generally avoidant of these low energy areas. Down to the south of the light red island, we have a very energy rich red area. The colours simply correspond to different food sources. So you can see this red and this red here, they are a similar food source. However, this area, as it's much darker in colour, you can tell that it is much more rich in energy. As the creatures move over, the more dull the colour, the less energy is on the tile. And you can see as the creatures travel over, they eat more of the surrounding area, and it regenerates fairly quickly. I'm keeping it on that just so they have an easier time. Over here we have more of an orange coloration. I am actually colourblind, so it might not be that colour. Not that it really matters. And it's the same layout as the red to the left. I have run this map simulation before, and we have a lot of creatures here actually, and in fact we have something that's already made it over to the red, and it looks like they're dead. Very nice. That's unfortunate. And we have another creature here trying to make it out to the more energy rich area down here, which it is a rectangular shape, which makes it much more accommodating than something like this, where they're more likely to encounter irregular coastlines to their terrain. So I'm not expecting things to make it over here, potentially ever. However, we are going to keep an eye out to see if anything over there can survive. Over here we have the same food source as the middle top and middle bottom islands, however much lower in energy density. You can see this is only 37 energy compared to 79 over here, which is uninhabited, and over here we have a maximum of 54. So this is a very much more harsh climate than this island here. However, as we can see so far, there is more than sufficient energy for the creatures travelling around at the moment. I am now going to be fast forwarding time now that I've explained the map a little bit more. We're going to fast forward time to about 64 times the speed. And you can see on this little section down here that says world time above the menus. In fact, let's explain this now. The world time basically represents years. It's not specific to Earth years, it's more units of time. So we can say at this point we're between 70 and 80 units of time. The calculations is how much the brain of the creatures are doing and how many there are. It's fairly irrelevant, but you can see how complicated things are getting. The species count corresponds to the top left bars. We've already been over that. The current relates to the number of creatures that are currently alive. The total is how many have lived and died. We are approaching 18,000. And the speed speaks for itself. 1.0 being regular speed. Anything less than that is slower than real speed, and currently we are running at 64 times the natural speed of this landmass. So I will see you again at about 250 units of world time. As the time goes on, generally what I've observed is the creature numbers stabilize, but then as sort of natural environments and interspecies relationships start to develop, the current number, the number of creatures totally on the world, will begin to fluctuate more and more. As well as the species count, it will generally drop over time, because some of the creatures may have evolved destructive traits that don't really take effect until many generations in. We have quite a high number. I'm expecting this to drop down to between 30 and 20. With the current, unless new islands are populated, I don't expect we'll exceed 320, but I could be wrong. It could be higher than that, and we could have a substantially lower creature count at the current time. I've actually stopped the time slightly earlier than I was going to stop at the 250 mark, because the number of species, the number of creatures has jumped dramatically, and we can see a very large change in the ecosystems of this planet. Unfortunately, we missed the transition from when creatures from the north, I assume. However, we will have to do a bit more investigation and see which creatures are more genetically similar from both of these islands. I imagine it's this one because that is a shorter journey to travel. This is a more treacherous route they can take. Over here on the Red Island, this is something I was talking about, having destructive traits over time, and it would appear that for whatever reason these creatures are. Here's something running from over on the middle. Looks like something went wrong with this creature. I don't think it was going to survive. You can keep an eye on him, and they're dead. So I think it's fair to say that the creatures from here, they have developed some behaviour, be it by chance or because it's genuinely beneficial for them, is they are not quite as adverse to travelling over this energy, this low density energy areas. If we jump over to the right of the islands, we can see that these creatures are very adverse to these low energy areas. Probably because they are accustomed to much lower energy rich environments, so they're more likely to try and conserve their energy. They're not going to have much spare. These creatures have substantially more energy, and we have some large creatures up here. I'm going to take a moment to explain a good way I will be differentiating the species in this group. We'll start at the northern island. We can see these two species are fairly similar. They have a very interesting life cycle where it looks like they grow extremely large and then all at once will spawn a huge number of offspring. And we can see they don't have a great survival rate, as other more strong and older creatures come in and devour them. However, we can see a number have survived, and we can imagine that a few of these may grow back to the size they need to reproduce. These white lines represent the vision, and the red line represents like a sensory something it can interact with physically. They can attack other creatures with it, they can sense the surrounding areas. So it's useful for both understanding the world around them and to attack or defend themselves from other creatures, because they are prepared to fight with each other. We look at the vision cones on these creatures. They are very narrow vision cones, and they move fairly slowly. They try to stick to a specific area. We can see they are looking at the numbers, OJL, OVL, they're fairly similar. And we do not see any other creatures with a similar genetic code on this island, so it's fair to assume, in fact, we may be witnessing a extinction event here. If this OVL creature were to die, that family tree would be completely lost, as it is the last... Oh, and it's dead. There we go, we just witnessed the extinction of the species just there. God knows what happened here. It looks like there's been a migration to the Red Island. I ran this simulation for about 2,000 years of time in my last one, and none of these islands, bottom, middle, and top left, neither were colonized. They stuck solely to the upper island and the landmass to the right. Let's do a bit of investigation and see if we can find which creatures on this island here are more genetically similar. If we look around here, we can see that there is a wide range of biodiversity on this island. It would seem that the creatures that first made it over here have a fairly high mutation rate. There are a huge number of species on the map at the moment, 54, and dropping slowly, but I expect that to either continue to drop as the new environments stabilize. We can see some behaviour here of some of the creatures that get very large and then create a huge number of offspring all at once. So we look here at the vision cones to try and determine which species are similar. We can see two fairly large vision sections on the left of their body and one on the right. These creatures have a full sort of 90-degree vision angle in front of them, and we can see that they are using that to their advantage to locate other creatures and to explore their environment. If we look up here to the north, we can see some behaviour where they are learning to avoid water. You can see they quickly try and turn around to get back on the land. And we can see they really don't like water. They don't last a very long time at all when they get out on water. Looking on this island, the biodiversity does look fairly small. Creatures have a very similar vision range, and their genetic names are fairly similar in length, and there are some similar numbers. It is hard, letters rather. It is hard to tell with this sort of thing. It is up into interpretation. We move down to the south. You can see a similar vision system over here. They're sticking out their tongues to try and explore the environment around them. They appear very similar, however slower. These creatures don't need to move as fast to get to different energy zones, so it looks like they have evolved to be much slower. However, as we can see, the creatures here were able to travel over the top left bridge and to a completely new area with a different climate, a different kind of food source, and somehow they managed to not only adapt to the new food source, but it would appear, I was going to say that their vision was slightly different, but it does in fact look very similar. If we look over on the far right here, you can see that their vision is much longer, and there are creatures with much wider cones of vision. We go down to the south of the island and we can see a similar sort of behaviour. These creatures seem... This creature over here is very aggressive. It is trying to kill these things over here. Some of them are much less aggressive. For instance, this species is just trying to avoid conflict, spin around. So it's fair to assume that that creature is not a hunting creature, it's an opportunistic eater, and it just died. So, poor guy. We are now approaching 300 units of time. I am now going to be fast forwarding at a high speed over to around 750 units of time to about 1,000. So I may miss that because I'm about to go and do a couple of things, so I will see you then. I got a bit impatient and stopped at 600 units of time. As we can see, all islands are now inhabited by quite interesting creatures. We're going to have a quick look over these, especially the new island. As we can see on the far right, life is not doing very well anymore. These creatures are much smaller in number, and we're going to have to see how they do over time. Creatures up here to the north, again, are not doing too good. They have developed very interesting, extremely wide cones of vision, which is quite interesting. They are, as we can see, very adverse to water, but extremely good at avoiding it. We can see this very complicated behaviour where they almost seem to just naturally know where the water is, which is very interesting, considering these creatures were completely random at the start, and it's the forces of natural selection and genetic drift that has created these creatures. They do not reproduce sexually, they actually reproduce asexually. It would be interesting to see what the result would be with sexual selection as well. However, that's not implemented into the program at the moment. Over on the new island, if we compare them to the creatures at the top, we can see it was clearly these ones that inhabited it. They are not particularly adverse to the low energy terrain. In fact, we saw this one just traversed from the south back to the north. So I imagine these creatures are particularly similar. If we look at some of their names, they are fairly short. And if we look over here, we can see a similar sort of family, I imagine, where the transition happened, compared to the ones further to the north, which have much longer names. And we'll just compare the vision cones, and with a narrower cone of vision. So once again, I'm going to speed ahead in time, and I will see you at 1,000 units. I got a bit impatient and actually stopped 50 units before the 1,000 mark. I just wanted to check in and see how they were doing. I'm going to be showing another feature of this program. If I slow things down now, just to let me get in here. Here you can see there are a number of settings that you can use to screw with your creatures or to try and encourage certain behaviours. And something I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be simulating a dramatic change in climate. I'm actually going to be reducing the climate from 3.75 down to 3. Now that is a dramatic change in the environment for these creatures. Let's see if I can get that right on 3. That's close. That's close enough. So we have now introduced a new climate. Over here on the right we have once again the very almost 180 degree vision creatures. They're quite speedy. And they like to fight each other. These are very aggressive species down here, chasing each other to the very edges of their territory. Yeah, very aggressive. That's quite funny. Up here on the north, we have very similar creatures again, very wide cone of vision. These are quite boring. Their behaviours for avoiding water have now actually got more advanced. They now no longer have to go in the water, and it looks like they're actually able to survive a fair amount of time in the water, where before they really didn't like it. Down here we have again a similar behaviour with these creatures as they migrated from similar locations and from fairly similar environments. We are seeing fairly similar development of traits across the islands. Because once again, creatures moved from the top middle to the top left to the bottom left. Up here on the top right, we have this these traits of these very large creatures that we've been seeing every now and again. We'll stick with them for a little bit longer and see if we can witness their reproductive cycle. Oh, there we go, we just saw this one. We saw it lose a huge bunch of mass and just have a huge swarm of children as they run out, already aggressive, already inherited the traits from the parent, how to attack, how to eat, and how to interact with their environment. This is a very good example of, if you can imagine it, it's almost genetic memories, base behaviours that a creature is just born with, which is a very interesting concept to imagine, that base behaviour can be inherited by genetics. But the main thing I think we learned from this software is that complicated behaviours come about even with complete chance. All there needs to be is some selective pressures on the creatures, and as long as they have genetics that allow them to mutate, they will change over time. And we'll just check back down here. I was about to say that these creatures are a bit boring, but it looks like some of them have in fact developed 360-degree vision. We can see right here at the back, big vision cone sticking right out at the back, which is very interesting. We can see over time how these species have diverged. These creatures still have the much narrower field of vision. However, down here, whereas they still have a focus on seeing to the right more than the left, their cones of vision are becoming wider, and this it's clearly beneficial. And we can see as the movement, where there used to be these three lines of vision, that has slowly moved around these creatures to the very back, and we can see how so many of these creatures are in the process of their cone of vision moving towards the back, or potentially moving back round to the front. It's hard to tell. We'd have to see them either a bit earlier or a bit sooner. Here we can see a creature with very, very symmetrical angles. And something we can see is that the creatures are slowly, very slowly becoming more symmetrical, because it's not actually, traits that are around by default. It's actually an emergent trait, and quite a late emergent trait. And we can see, in fact, that many creatures are developing this back vision. It may be because they are so genetically similar, the way they've colonized other islands, and I'm sure these creatures have been migrating happily between the worlds over the years that we haven't witnessed. We can see them happily crossing this very desert terrain. You can see this creature attempting to make it up to the north, and it in fact makes it, but gets in a fight and dies. Poor thing. The current, oh wow, in the middle here, in the bottom right, in the bottom of the map, it's hard to tell if it was just destructive traits in their genetics, or whether it was the change in climate that has dramatically reduced the number of creatures. I say I made the prediction, it's because I knew I was going to be changing the climate, and you can see here on the bottom middle island, this huge climate event, this change in the environment, has affected them dramatically. There are only 2 creatures left, which at one point was the most populated location on this continent. Of course, if this island is completely uninhabited, once more creatures stumble upon it, it will be populated again. So I don't imagine, we've already witnessed that they have the behaviour, and it looks like they have clearly evolved to be able to travel these low energy areas in search of more fertile lands. So I'm fairly confident to say that this island will be inhabited in the near future, even if there is full extinction. I think we have a fairly good idea of what our creatures look like at the moment. So let us fast forward even more time. We'll meet back here in about 1,500 units of time. Okay, welcome to 500 units of time in the future. As you can see, the shift in the climate has changed the world dramatically. Mass extinction event, we're sitting at about half the creature count as we did before. As we can see, we had a total extinction of the leftmost islands. And as we can see with the change in the climate, the creatures have become much less explorative. However, we did just see one creature here make it onto this island. So before we look at the rest and examine the change in climate, let's just see if this creature gives birth to any young. We'll check back with them in a minute. Down here on the south, we can see, as I predicted, that this island, very high in resources, was recolonized. It's difficult to tell if it was from the left or right. Interestingly, creatures have begun to lose their backmost, in some cases, their backmost vision cones, and they have been moving to the side of the creature to give them a 180-degree view so that they can see better what's in front of them rather than behind them. However, in the north, we can see that change has not occurred here. The creatures, almost all of them now, have these back cone visions. In fact, some of them have 2 vision cones to their back, which is extremely interesting, that these creatures have changed so much. The effect of the genetic drift being when creature populations are isolated for a long period of time, they change so much that they effectively become entirely new kinds of creatures. We move over here to the very right of the map. These creatures kind of boring. I'm not a big fan of these ones. They are developing some interesting traits on their body. They are getting very good right-sided vision for some reason, 2 vision cones. I'm not sure why that's developing here. You'd think they would want more on their right side. Down here we see much smarter creatures with their evolution. They have much wider cones of vision. They can see almost completely in front of them. So good job on them. Unfortunately, in the top right, our little friend did not make it. He was not cut out to survive in the new energy environment. It would seem that the food source was just too different. It wasn't able to get enough energy efficiently enough to survive on these continents. Perhaps an explanation for this is these creatures, due to the change in climate, have become more specialized in using these colors of food as energy, as these are the same kind of food. Like I said before, these are completely different. For here we can see a creature did manage to make it from the right to the left. We'll follow this one for a moment. And he's dead. This simulation has been running for about an hour. I am now going to stop this at 2,000 units of time. I was expecting to end this long before now, but these creatures have been very interesting. I've been very proud of them. They've developed some very cool behaviors and genetic diversity. So I will see everyone back at 2,000 units of time. So I overshot things a bit. We are now approaching 2,300 units of world time. As you can see, the leftmost islands have been recolonized. Good job on our creatures. They were able to make use of this huge new pieces of land. And as you can see, over time, even with the dramatic effect of climate change, these creatures have learned how to adapt, and they are once again flourishing. We'll have a quick look over these creatures again. We can see they have developed 180-degree vision on only one side of their body. Sorry for the cut there. We are now on the top left island. We can see a large diversity in size of the creatures. Here we can see one giving birth to a big swarm of creatures, a behaviour we've seen come recurrent over the world units that we have seen here. Once again, we can see them reproducing here. Move over to the middle island, we see a similar behaviour. There are large creatures, that one just died. In fact, I'm incorrect. Most creatures on this island are a similar size. It would appear that it is not an energy dense enough area for them to grow so big. However, once again, on the richer energy islands, we have larger creatures again that exhibit the same reproductive behaviour where they get very large. They give birth to a huge number of young. It looks like these ones unfortunately have broken. They did not inherit good evolutionary traits. They will die soon as they cannot eat. If we compare these larger creatures and their vision cone, if we go up north, all the big ones are dead again. If we can find bigger ones, we can see that they are actually diverse, and these, due to their vision cones, they are different over time. So I think we're going to end this simulation after we get to about 230 units of world time. We've witnessed some very interesting behaviours develop over time. We watched the development of migratory behaviour. We watched the effects of a dramatic climatological shift leading to a mass extinction event, and we also witnessed life pop back up after two islands on the left were completely devoid of life. We watched our creatures recolonize these islands. We also saw interesting behaviour of creatures growing to incredibly large sizes and spawning a number of creatures at once. I'm really proud of these creatures. They've done a very good job, and they got some very interesting behaviour. Let's say goodbye to these creatures now. Do a quick run over these islands. Goodbye, creatures. You've served us well, and we will miss you. Unfortunately, I can't be bothered messing around with the files, so after I end this simulation, we won't be able to return back to this continent. This video was really interesting to make. I absolutely love this stuff. I find it absolutely fascinating. If you've learned anything from this video, that's great. If you've enjoyed it, if you want to see more of this sort of thing, if you find it interesting, I'm going to be linking the channels of the people responsible for this piece of software, and also you can have a look through there for more videos on some different softwares as well. If you'd like to see more of this from myself, please leave me a comment with some suggestions on how I can improve. I have a huge number of ideas of different environments we can test for these creatures. They really have a huge range of potential behaviours, and I would love to be able to show that off. Alright everyone, take care.